Imagine a single place holding the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world, not from medical breakthroughs to astronomical charts, all vanished in a blink. What if I told you that the greatest treasure trove of human wisdom, the Library of Alexandria, still holds secrets we can only dream of? Join us as we journey into the heart of this lost legacy, uncovering the untold stories of a knowledge empire that disappeared, leaving behind an enduring mystery. What if the cure for a modern disease, or the blueprint for a revolutionary technology, was lost forever within the ashes of the Library of Alexandria? For centuries, this legendary institution was the epicenter of human thought, a beacon of enlightenment. But what really happened to its countless scrolls and the incredible discoveries they contained? Prepare to dive into the enduring enigma of humanity's greatest lost library, the Library of Alexandria, a name that conjures images of unimaginable knowledge, yet also profound loss. We're talking about the complete disappearance of millions of texts that shaped civilizations. What were its most guarded secrets? And could any fragments of that lost wisdom still exist today? This isn't just history. It's a deep dive into a vanished legacy that continues to baffle and inspire us. So here is our question, simple and staggering. What did the library truly hold? Who built that empire of ideas? How did it disappear? And what traces of its spirit still whisper to us today? Follow the Nile's glittering curve to a harbor where marble colonnades met the sea, where the scent of papyrus mingled with brine, and where memory itself was crafted like a ritual against oblivion. In a city raised by Alexander and crowned by the Ptolemies, a sanctuary to the Muses stood beside temples to ancient gods. Knowledge was not just power here. It was sacred. It was a path to the divine, a way to align human minds with the cosmic order, Mat, under the watchful eyes of Thoth, lord of writing, and Serapis, the god who bound Greek and Egyptian worlds. We know the library existed not as a myth, but as a heartbeat within the palaces. Strabo, the geographer, described the Mausion, its cloisters, its shared dining hall where scholars ate together, debated everything, and walked under colonnades that echoed with poetry and proofs. From royal decree, books arriving on ships at Alexandria's docks were seized, copied by expert hands, and returned, usually the copies, while the originals vanished into the stacks. Once, it said, the Ptolemies borrowed Athens' official manuscripts of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, paid a massive deposit, and kept the originals anyway, sending back immaculate duplicates. Ruthless, perhaps, yet this was the creed of a dynasty that sought to gather the world's mind in one place. Inside, shelves filled with the voices of continents. The Pinakes, Callimachus's masterwork, was the first great library catalog, an index of knowledge across more than 100 volumes, listing authors, beginnings of texts, and subjects, mapping everything from epic to medicine, engineering to philosophy. Imagine being a scholar with that atlas of wisdom, following a thread from Homer to anatomy to the mechanics of air, all within a single day's walk. What did they study in those rooms? Let us step into a summer noonday in Egypt. In Syene, modern Aswan, the sun stands perfectly overhead, casting no shadow. In Alexandria, far to the north, a slender gnomon thrust into the ground throws a precise sliver of shade. Eratosthenes, a librarian with a mind tuned to the geometry of the heavens, measures the angle. About 1/50th of a circle. He knows the distance between Syene and Alexandria along the desert roads. Multiply. He calculates the size of the Earth with stunning accuracy, ages before satellite geodesy, before even Rome reached its zenith. His treatise on the measurement of the Earth wasn't the product of magic. It was the offspring of a city that turned observation into revelation. In adjacent rooms, the pulse becomes a language. Herophilus and Erasistratus, physicians working in Alexandria's intellectual orbit, study nerves in the brain, distinguishing veins from arteries, turning the human body into a decipherable text. They listen to the rhythm of the heart, time it with water clocks. Controversially, they dissect the dead and perhaps even the living, crossing moral boundaries that shock us now. But their goal is universal, to wrestle death and disease into understanding. Most of their writings are lost, surviving only in fragments quoted by later doctors. Yet through those shards we feel a vanished age, daring to peer inside the sanctum of life, down corridors thick with ink and debate. Librarians refine language itself. Xenodotus, Aristophanes of Byzantium, Aristarchus, masters of grammar and textual criticism, sift Homer's verses, marking suspect lines with a symbol, an obolos, to separate later additions from the ancient core. The breath marks and accents we learn in Greek, seeds of those conventions were nurtured here. A new instrument of precision was forged, not metal or stone, but editorial method, arguably as revolutionary as any machine. And what of the sky? In Alexandria, astronomers like Timocharis and Aristillus charted the stars, their careful measurements later used by Ptolemy in the Almagest. By the time of Aristarchus, another great mind, whispers of a heliocentric cosmos dared to surface. Imagine that idea flickering in the lamplight, the sun at the center, Earth a traveler. It did not prevail then. But it existed, and perhaps its mathematical skeleton rested on those shelves for any seeker to find. The strange and the practical mingled here. Ctesibius tinkered with air and water, inventing the force pump, improving clocks, writing treatises on pneumatics that would inspire later engineers. Hero of Alexandria would later charm audiences with automata, doors opening by themselves, singing birds, miracles of steam and pressure. And somewhere in an alcove smelling of gum arabic and glue, a scribe wonders which truth matters more, the triumphant page or the fragile life of a papyrus scroll that must be recopied before insects and time devour it. We have only whispers from the archives because the library spoke to us through others. A geographer's note, a physician's complaint, a poet's dedication, a line in a later commentary. The Pinakes itself is gone. Eratosthenes' volumes survive in echoes. Whole constellations of texts once visible are now dark. So we ask the forbidden question, what else lay on those shelves? A manual for a more efficient water screw? An early map of monsoon winds binding Egypt to India beyond the Red Sea? A treatise that quietly proved that the planets moved in ellipses? We cannot know. But when you assemble the fragments and stare through them like a lattice, the silhouette that emerges feels centuries ahead. And yet, if this was a beacon of human thought, how did it fade? The legend says fire. Caesar's siege of Alexandria in Surjabad BCE lit a blaze on the waterfront. Warehouses, granaries, ships went up, and with them, some students argue, stores of papyrus destined for the library's copyists. Later centuries brought war again. The 3rd century battles under Aurelian ravaged the city's core. The Serapeum, the grand temple to the syncretic god Serapis, housed a daughter library in its cloisters. In Samnite Josri CE, amid religious fervor and imperial decrees, that temple fell, its libraries likely with it. Then came the murder of Hypatia in Sibai Ishawu, a philosopher and mathematician who taught in Alexandria's auditoria, her death symbolic of a city's intellectual unraveling. But listen closely. There was no single night when one great blaze consumed everything. The loss was slower, crueler. Scroll by scroll, room by room, generation by generation. Like sand stealing a footprint, what does a vanished library leave behind? A shadow, yes, but also a scent, salt, papyrus, lamp smoke, and questions that still pull us like a tide. Which is why today the quest continues, not with chariots and torches, but with sonar, satellites, and algorithms. Stand on the breakwater of modern Alexandria and look down into the green-blue water. Beneath the waves lie toppled columns, statues worn smooth by the sea, the broken teeth of palaces. Divers from international teams, working with Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, the Institut Européen d'Archaeologie Sous-Marine, and the Centre d'études Alexandrines, have mapped the drowned royal quarter where Cleopatra once walked. They've found the scattered bones of the Pharos lighthouse near Fort Kate Bay, huge blocks that once threw fire to the edge of the earth. Each find tightens the net around a city that birthed the library's world. No scrolls survive underwater. But the city's skeleton does, and from it we reconstruct the muscles, the institutions, the streets, the rhythms of learning that made the library possible. Move inland to Kom El Dika, and you find something astonishing. Rows of stepped benches, semicircular classrooms, the remains of dozens of lecture halls from the Roman period. Imagine the murmur of students, the scratch of stylus on wax, the rustle of cloaks. Education didn't end when the shelves thinned. The idea of a university took root here, rippling outward, outlasting the stacks themselves. Beyond stone and sea, the desert keeps secrets of its own. Fiver de Summensenger of Trasa become time capsules, preserving sapphire. In the sands of Egypt, at places like Oxyrhynchus, garbage heaps became time capsules, preserving papyri both sacred and ordinary. Shopping lists, private letters, lost plays, fragments of philosophy. With multispectral imaging, scholars coax ink back into visibility from what looks like mere dust. Each recovered sentence is a message in a bottle from the age of the library. Somewhere in this avalanche of scraps, a citation, a title, a passage reappears, allowing us to glimpse what the Pentakes once listed and the stacks once cradled. And now the digital. If the Ptolemies dreamt of owning every book, modern scholars dream of seeing every book at once, virtually, using the surviving citations, references in later authors, and the fragmentary remains of ancient catalogs. Teams build databases that echo Callimachus's Pinakes. Click a name, Aristarchus, Eratosthenes, Apollonius, and watch a web bloom, works cited by whom, preserved in which manuscript, translated into which Arabic treatises centuries later. The network of knowledge becomes a star map. In climate-controlled rooms, scanners glide over brittle folios. Algorithms unmix ink layers, invisible to the human eye. Even palimpsests, parchments scraped and rewritten, yield their ghosts when bathed in the right light. The Archimedes palimpsest taught us that buried texts can breathe again. What else waits, miscatalogued, faded, mislabeled? In basements and monasteries. Walk finally into the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, the modern library standing on the shore. A monument to memory. Its vast reading room opens like a sunrise, tears fanning out under a roof carved with letters from scripts across the world. Cuneiform, hieroglyphs, Greek, Arabic, all the tongues that once argued and sang in this city. Here, librarians and programmers join forces. Digital repositories grow. A scribe's lamp is now a server humming in a cool room. A scholar's commentary becomes an open access link. The past is not resurrected whole, but it is translated into a form the future can hold. When we asked a historian who studies Alexandria what keeps them searching, the answer wasn't nostalgia. It was responsibility. The library's myth, they said, is a parable. It warns us how easily brilliance can be scattered. But it also teaches us that ideas survive by migrating into other languages, into other cities, into other minds. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, centuries later, copied and expanded Greek science, preserving what Alexandria had fostered. Medieval scribes guarded texts through winters of ignorance and fire. Knowledge is a caravan crossing epochs, and yet the warning is unmistakable. We live in an age that believes all information is immortal because it lives in the cloud. But clouds thin, files corrupt, links rot, formats become unreadable. A thumb drive is no safer than a papyrus reed if no one cares for it. Censorship still burns books, sometimes figuratively, sometimes literally. War still topples archives. A single budget cut can make a museum's glass go dark. We think we are beyond loss. We are not. The library's enduring shadow falls over us not to chill, but to guide. The ancients thought of writing as a ritual against death, a way to keep a soul speaking after the body is gone. That belief is inscribed into Egypt's oldest tombs, whose walls murmured spells to carry the dead into the field of reeds. In Alexandria, that ritual expanded to embrace the world's knowledge. To copy was to consecrate. To catalog was to balance the scales of order against chaos. If you listen, you can still hear the scrape of reed pen on papyrus, like a heartbeat. So what were its most guarded secrets? Perhaps not a singular cure or an impossible machine, but a method, a faith that the universe can be measured and mapped, that human beings, flawed, curious, reverent, can collaborate across time. Eratosthenes measuring the earth with a shadow, Herophilus timing the pulse, a librarian marking a doubtful line in Homer with a quiet, skeptical scratch. The devotion to Mott, not as piety but as practice, truth as symmetry, truth as balance, truth as a thing you check and test and share, and could fragments of that lost wisdom still exist today? They do, in a Syriac translation of a Greek commentary in a monastery, in an Arabic astronomical table quoting a vanished Alexandrian note, in a papyrus scrap that, under infrared light, reveals a line no one has read in EBABIT years, in a classroom where a student learns that the world is measurable, and so are their questions, in a library where a curator chooses to digitize something because they know someone someday will need it. If there is a climax to this story, it is not the crackle of burning scrolls. It is the moment we recognize ourselves as stewards. Here's to a city that gathered knowledge under the gaze of gods and the turning of stars. The Library of Alexandria did not die in one night. Its spirit scattered, fused into the infrastructures of universities, museums, and archives across Earth. The question is whether we will honor that inheritance. So let this be our oath, whispered over the same sea wind that once filled the sails of book hunters. We will value what others wrote. We will preserve what we learn. We will copy, share, translate, back up, teach. We will resist the slow erasures, neglect, greed, fanaticism that unmake libraries. Because the greatest secret of the Library of Alexandria is not what it lost. It is what it taught, that human memory is only as strong as our will to keep it alive. Stand at the harbor, Watch the sun lower like a coin into the water. The waves strike the stones where scholars once walked, where pharaohs, priests, and Greek philosophers nodded to one another, where the muses and the gods of the Nile shared the same sky. The library may be gone, but its horizon remains. If we protect it, if we expand it, then nothing is truly lost. And somewhere in the hush between page turns, you can still hear the city breathe, inviting us to continue the search.